Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of In the Pit with your host, Lobo Tigre of the Independent Speculator. Our victim of the day is Andrew Brodkey. He's the COO of Idaho Copper Corporation. Frankly, this story was brought to my attention and I saw a bunch of red flags and big questions right away, so I wasn't sure that they wanted to step in the pit with me, but they did. So, Andrew, why don't you go ahead and give us an overview? We're always looking for an interesting copper story, and then we'll get to my questions.
Thank you, Lobo, for having me on today, and I appreciate the opportunity. So the company is called Idaho Copper. We recently completed a reverse takeover of a U.S. shell on the OTC pink sheets. We're going to be uplisting to the OTC QB shortly, but the plan ultimately is to, in about a year, when we file 210Ks, move up to a much more senior U.S. exchange, either the NASDAQ or the Amex. And that's really the general plan for the company. But what the company's about is a very massive copper project, actually it's copper, molybdenum, silver project, advanced, drilled in the state of Idaho. A lot of wonderful advantages to this project, but let me say that we've got everything that you want to see in a project. We've got power nearby, we've got water, we're very close to Boise, which is the capital of the state of Idaho. There's a good workforce there. We're in a really good jurisdiction. I'm happy to later, as I know as we'll progress, get into the details of the project. I'm sure the listeners will want to hear about that. But the real story here is a massive project, billions of pounds of copper, billions of pounds of molybdenum, hundreds of millions of ounces of silver, one of the largest undeveloped projects of this kind in North America. And we're just getting our story out. This is, I think, the second opportunity that we've had to talk to the media. So I'm anxious to tell people about what we are about.
I think my feelings may be hurt if you call me media, but okay, we'll let that slide. From your perspective, I guess I am. I understand that the company had been working on Kumo, copper moly, for 10 years before the Joe access to listing. Why that route? Why not IPO and why Joe? Isn't there a shell somewhere in Canada where you could get right to the TSXV? And then it seems a little odd.
I can explain it this way. Well, we were a subsidiary at one time wholly owned, now partially owned by a TSXV company that, if you will, sort of stubbed its toe. And even though this project had great value and has great value, the market never really understood what was going on. And so our goal was to get really out of Canada for now. That isn't to say we'd always be out of Canada, but we saw much more opportunity in the US. Yes, Canada has sophisticated natural resource investors. Yes, Canada understands this business, but the U.S. is a much larger market, and the opportunity really came to us to get our way into the U.S. markets and, like I said, move into a more senior exchange when we qualify for it.
Okay. And when I looked into this at first, the first thing that came up was a regulatory slapdown. So I got to ask, when the regulators say they find major improper disclosures, what is your response to that?
Easily done, because like many people and many companies that run afoul of the British Columbia Securities Commission, we were hit with what they considered to be improper disclosure. We talked about some future targets about where we wanted to be. Interestingly enough, in the US, it's permitted. You can talk about targets. Apparently in Canada, you can't. And we still had a link to Canada by virtue of one director and the idea that we were at one time the subsidiary of a Canadian company. Yet another reason to get out of Canada and get to the US. But the disclosure really comes down to this. We talked about what we wanted to be in terms of future targets, what this project could look like. We published some actual numbers where we thought we could go. The Securities Commission said, no, you can't do that. You need to go and file a new technical report, and they gave us some other things to do. That was our plan for this year anyway, so really nothing lost. And the idea of this BCSC CTO, cease trade order, is really a non-event. It doesn't affect anything we're really doing in the US. It doesn't affect our company. It only has some effect inside of British Columbia, where we're not operating anyway.
Yeah, I'm not a lawyer, so I got to wonder. I mean, there are plenty of companies out there that put not just forward-looking statements, but corporate goals. our corporate goal is 5 million ounces, and somehow that's okay. I don't know how they decide which is and which is not okay, but I hear you on that. But maybe let me pivot the conversation slightly. Like, why are we having this conversation? There's no trading volume, so I'm looking. The current ticker is GTVI in the U.S., and to say that it trades by appointment would be generous, I think. So, are you looking to raise money, or we can't have people rushing out to buy the stock today, even if they fell in love with the story, because there's nobody selling. So, why are we here?
This is, as I mentioned kind of earlier on in the conversation, this is an opportunity to just start to introduce the company to the market and to potential shareholders. We are raising money privately currently. We've got some private placement ongoing. We are actually hooking up with a retail brokerage to access some of their clients' interest. So all that's happening at the same time. But you're right. It does, quote unquote, trade by appointment. There's very little volume, principally because the largest shareholders of the company are tied up. When we merged with Joway, and by the way, the name's being changed. We're stuck in FINRA because FINRA is tardy on our requested name change. But when it's done, and we're actually very optimistic it's going to be very quickly because we have been in touch with FINRA, the name will be changed from Joway to Idaho Copper Corporation. But back to what I was saying.
And sorry, real quick, will the ticker change when that happens?
I hope so. We want to go from GTVI, which really has no relevance to us, to IDCU. That'll be the new ticker, we hope. But the idea is that we want to be trading in the U.S. We like the U.S. markets. We think we're going to be here in the U.S. As I was saying earlier, the major shareholders and all management are tied up by virtue of this reverse takeover. Our shares are locked. We have lockup agreements, so that's why you're not seeing any volume. But that will go away at the time when, or soon after we uplist. Again, next year, about a year from now, is the general target.
All righty. And I do want to talk about the rocks here, but before we move on from corporate stuff, I looked at the last MD&A posted on the website. Does that refer to the private company that RTO'd into Joway, or is that Joway? Because it only shows like $74,000, as I recall, spent last year. And that doesn't seem like enough to do any work or even to pay salaries for geologists and things. So where are we at in terms of what the private company has been doing? Has it been working busily all this time, or was it just sort of in pause, waiting for the public vehicle to raise money to get the show going, or where are we at?
Well, the K I think you're looking at really is Joway. It's not this company. We will file a K fairly shortly, and then you'll see the business of this company and our property explained in great detail. What I think you're seeing is, and what happened was in 2022, last year was dedicated towards separating ourselves from our TSXV parent company. And the culmination of that, of course, was the RTO when we became finally a public company here after the merger and trading in the U.S. But it took us a year to unwind the relationship. But now we are a public company, independent, trading in the U.S., and you should see publicly revealed everything about the company, our project, all the things we want to do. There have been some press releases, not enough, but as I mentioned earlier, this is an opportunity to get out to the public. And thank you again for letting us do this and start to tell our story.
All right, well, let's talk about that story then. I get that it's big, it's like 12 billion pounds of copper or something like that. But the first thing that smacks you in the face is it's pretty low grade. It's 0.1, 0.13 copper, and I get that you've got moly and silver credits in there. But even on a copper equivalent basis, it's still, it's below 0.3. And then you never recover all the metals equally. So I'm wondering, since there was a past PEA, how good was the metallurgy and how well is that equivalency number understood? And, how can you reassure me that this has enough grade to matter here?
And I'm glad you asked that question because it's really important to our whole story. Let me start with a little bit of the geology and mineralogy. Okay, this is a copper, molybdenum, silver porphyry. Okay, people think for porphyries, they think of kind of disseminated, relatively low grade, relatively evenly distributed mineralization. That's not what this is. It's a porphyry, but it's also a stockwork. And so the geologists that listen to this presentation will understand what I'm talking about. Stockwork means thin veins distributed throughout the ore body. It's not uniform. And these veins, which are very thin, carry 95% of the grade of the mineralization. And that, in turn, lends itself to a very common proven technology used in the mining business called ore sorting. In the 2020 PEA that was published under the authorship of SRK, obviously a very well-known consultancy, they used some data that was provided that indicated that we could separate 28% of the waste from the ore before it went into the actual concentrator. Okay, and that led to the idea that we needed a mill, a concentrator, in the size of about 150,000 tons a day. That's a lot of capital. In fact, the capital for the 2020 PEA was over $3 billion. When I got involved in this project, which is about a year ago, the first thing I said was, wow, no one's going to look at this project. And you're right, I'm getting back to the grade. The copper equivalent grade is 0.27. It doesn't really stand up against other projects. But the key to this project isn't the in situ grade, it's the head grade. What's the grade going to the mill? We've done visual sorting. All 60,000 plus feet of core have been visually sorted. We are now involved in ore sorting. In fact, that's the whole goal of 2023. Optimize the ore sorting. I'll get into the details a little bit later on, but bigger picture, visual sorting says that optimally or ideally we could separate 84% of the waste before it ever hits the mill. What that means is, if we were able to achieve that, that means we'd be able to build a concentrator of about 30,000 tons a day, not 150,000 tons a day. And the whole key to this project is getting rid of the waste before it goes into the ore stream. You're able to do that. You're able to pull the capital down to under $1 billion. The head grade to the mill is like 2% copper, and everything flows from that. So many mines use this. They have to, because the metallurgy and the mineralogy is so different these days. You can't find typical porphyries like you could 15, 20 years ago. And this mine, like I'm indicating, really is going to benefit from this ore sorting exercise, which we're currently undertaking.
Well, I hear you. And yeah, if you could reduce the amount of material going into the plant by 84%, that would clearly be a game changer. That would be huge. I'll grant you that. On the other hand, while ore sorting is not new, and yes, it is being successfully used in some mines, it's also something that often makes investors run away screaming because, if the mine was any good, it wouldn't need the ore sorting in the first place. And there's so many cases where it didn't work out so well. The project never went forward. So I know you're only working on a PEA at the moment, but will there be more than theoretical test work here? I mean, beyond bench scale, I'd like to see a pilot test of some significant tonnage to give us confidence that this really will work.
All in due time. And we have to start where the technology people tell us we need to start. So we're scanning all of our core now in Salt Lake City with an outfit called Veracio. They used to be Bort Longyear. So we can compare the visual grades versus the actual grades of the core when it was drilled and laboratory analyzed. And now we're scanning it again. And that will tell us exactly what we need to do when it comes to selecting our core pieces that are going up to an outfit called MineSense. MineSense in Vancouver, which has installations throughout the world. They work for Teck at Highland Valley. They work for Copper Mountain in BC also, where their technology is deployed. They have a special technology called Bucket Sense. And Bucket Sense allows you to take a bucket full of material, and as it actually is loaded in, these sensors in the bucket itself can give you enough information to determine and make a differentiation between what's waste and what's ore. So that's our test this year. We're sending about 12 or 15 different 55-gallon drums filled with core pieces up to MineSense, and they will give us those sorts of results back. Now, your question goes beyond that. Well, yeah, obviously people want to see this done more of on a pilot scale. We'll get to that, but this is kind of our first cut. This is as much as I think we can do this year. But let me add this to it. That ore sorting is going to be at the face. We expect that probably instead of truck shovel, this giant open pit that we're going to have is going to be using conveyors. And we'll be able to deploy, and the next phase is bench scale sort of testing, scanning devices that are penetrative, like PGNAA or PFTNA scanners. And those will, again, be able to help you determine among the ore column that goes into the mill.
Yeah, no, I get it. Coming off the conveyor, it makes a big difference. I can see that.
Yeah.
Okay, but I don't think we touched on the other part of the question. What about the recoveries? Have you got any actual met testing to show? I mean, the molybdenum is really important. It's not called Kumo, by accident. So, I mean, you're counting on a lot of that value in the moly. The silver, okay, it's big, but it's pretty small. But the moly really needs to work. So if you're looking at recoveries of, great recoveries for copper, but really so-so or crappy recoveries on the moly, that has a huge impact. How detailed is the metallurgy on that so far?
Very, very, very advanced. It's part of the PEA. The work was done originally in 2009 by Alsenko, have all those technical reports. Our recoveries, like you indicated, on the copper in the 90s, and the moly, as I recall, is at that level or fairly close. So we know the recoveries are going to be good. This ore does separate out fairly well on the metallurgical side. So I don't think that's going to be a problem.
And I know that, moly's kind of got everybody excited this year with the spike earlier, but it's given almost all of that back. Are you planning to use a long-term trailing price average, or I guess that's not a question. I'm just telling you, please don't use a more recent moly price in your study. Use something credible.
When I do my modeling, I'm trying to be conservative. In the PEA, the 2020 PEA, SRK used $3 copper, $12.50 moly, and I think 15 silver. I may have those two interposed. But yeah, we're going to be conservative, and we know the moly market fairly well. And it is, as you indicated, one that kind of goes up and down. There's, just like our shares, that there isn't a whole lot of trading going on in the moly market. But moly itself is becoming far more important with the greening of the economy. It's one of the metals, just like copper, that's a green metal. It should be listed as a critical metal in the U.S. It's not. We're trying to get that changed. There's a lot of good things to say about the future of the uses of both of those particular metals, and even silver for that matter.
All right, so speaking of the study, and I know it's a couple years, but it's a couple years of higher interest rates, and I noticed that the NPV, it's very rate sensitive. At your base case, it's positive, looks like good money. At 5% discount, it's, it goes up into the billions, but at a 10% discount, it goes negative. So, hats off for publishing that number, not keeping it swept under the rug. But in this higher for longer environment, what impact does that have on your study? What do you think is the appropriate discount? I mean, there are a lot of companies using 10% these days.
We're probably going to continue to publish everything so people can see the difference in the application of the discount rate. But I am confident that after the ore sorting information is fed into this whole exercise, that even at 10%, we're going to be very, very positive. We're looking for, and I hate to say a target here, hope the BCSE isn't listening, but we're looking for multi-billions of dollars, even at the 10% discount rate.
All right. Well, then I got to ask, I noticed in your fact sheet, in your presentation, the NPV numbers were there, but there was no IRR. Why would that not be disclosed?
Probably nothing more than an oversight, but the IRR, as I recall, the base case was about 10%. And it goes up, obviously, when you get into the 5% discount rate, and it's virtually, nothing even to mention when you're it's negative when you look at the 10% discount. But yeah, well, thank you for that. That's probably something we should pay attention to.
Kind of important, return on investment. All right. Well, again, I'm not trying to beat up on you here, but I've got to ask, this project's been around for a while. I noticed the project history slide. It was kind of interesting, and it goes way back. I suppose the answer is in the ore sorting, but ore sorting is not new. Why is this an opportunity now? And if And if it was so obvious that this could be done and done well, why wasn't it done before?
Ore sorting, you're right, it's been around for like 35, 40 years, but the advances in ore sorting are relatively new. So the application of some of these technologies that can permeate the ore itself, like PGNAA and PFTNA, have only been around for maybe probably less than a decade. And that's just the secondary ore sorting. Well, we're probably going to be using, in addition to the ore sorting at the face, which will be like a bucket level, bucket sensor, and on the conveyor we'll have the penetrative ore sorting, and then further on down the line, as the volume of material continues to decrease, we'll probably be looking at some particle sorting, and that'll be tertiary sorting, and that will tell you even more, or not tell you, will allow you even more to separate high grade from low grade, et cetera. But the real answer to your question, Lobo, is that in this particular instance, number one, a lot of the technology that we wanted to deploy wasn't available for many years. Number two, I don't think anybody looked at it. You've got a brand new management team. You've got people that are technically oriented like myself that came in, and we recognized some of these issues in the past very early on in our tenure.
Okay. Well, actually, so now that you bring that up, let me rewind. Normally I ask this at the beginning, but since you brought up, I should ask, who are you? What's your experience in this? Why should we trust you and your CEO? Tell us a little bit about the team here. What is your track record?
Our CEO is Stephen Brodkey. He's an American living in London. He was a very high-level executive with Glencore for many years, mostly on the trading side. Since then, he's had a lot of experience running as a CEO a number of different companies in the natural resources industry, not necessarily mining. He's a generally, I would say, a very, very competent, very smart, very, very good guy, very well connected. Myself, I'm a mining engineer and a lawyer. And I worked originally for Magma Copper and then BHP when we were merged into BHP in the late 90s. And I stayed involved after that merger for about 6 years. I formed my own, when I left BHP, I formed my own boutique shop doing M&A type work, but a lot of an analytical, technical work, developing models and doing a lot of due diligence site visits on projects, representing companies that were big companies that had assets that they wanted to sell. And then I ran 4 juniors that were more exploration juniors, different commodities. One was copper, one was gold, one was iron ore, and the other was lithium. And then I became more of a general consultant until about 2 years ago when I was tapped to come in and help this particular company out. I've been involved with all facets of different projects. I've brought projects, helped bring projects in to past the study stage and into actual construction and commissioning. My track record is pretty much, speaks for itself. I've done a lot of work and always been in this industry. I've been in the industry for 35 years.
All right, and all the details of those companies are on your bio page on your website?
I don't think all of them, but if you go to LinkedIn, I think you'll see principally everything that I've done. We've purposely kept the bios in our corporate presentation and on the website relatively brief.
All righty. Well, let's go back to the rocks then. Anytime I look at big projects in the U.S., the first thing that comes to mind is it Forest Service land, BLM land, private. I noticed you had like a half a dozen patented claims, but I presume for a big project like this, that doesn't cover much of it.
No, we're on Forest Service land. We've been working with the Forest Service, or the company has before I got here, for the last, call it, since probably 2005 or so, when the first first modern drilling was done. And yeah, it's Forest Service. We know what we need to do. We're currently waiting for the approval and a finding of no significant impact so that we can complete our drilling. There's an EA out for our drilling. It's been delayed for a couple of years for a number of different reasons. But now that the new management team is involved, things are going about the way you'd expect. Of course, the NGOs are involved too. They don't want projects. This particular project isn't going to affect any major stream. We're on what's called Grimes Creek, and part of the plan here, as you would expect, as part of our supplemental environmental project, will be to clean up 27 miles of historical dredged gold tailings that are in Grimes Creek. The ICL, which is the Idaho Conservation League, doesn't like any mining. They think that we're going to somehow affect the Boise River, which goes into the city of Boise, but we're not. We're going to avoid that. We're going to clean up the historical issues, and we're going to obviously construct and operate very responsibly in accordance with all modern standards.
Is there maybe a land swap deal or some pristine place somewhere you could buy and give them to trade? Because, I mean, even if you do it by clean modern standards, it's a great big open pit. I mean, this isn't a small underground mine with minimal visible impact. You're going to make a great big hole in the ground. Granted,
but we're in an area that really, I would say, is fairly off the beaten path. We're 35 miles north of the city of Boise, but and it's easy road access, but it's not really used for anything currently. There may be some hunters periodically that come in. I'm going to cross that bridge later, but you raise a good point. Any mine today in the U.S. on federal land, whether it's BLM, Forest Service, or whatever other federal agency, is faced with the same issues. And I will tell you that there are some other mines in Idaho that are on headwaters of, let's say, salmon rivers and places that they're going to have difficult problems. We're just not in that same category.
All righty. Well, I don't know the local geography there, so I'll have to bow to you on that. All right. Assuming everything goes according to plan this year, what are the deliverables? You've got a PEA with the ore sorting. You're not doing any drilling. You're just doing studies right now, or what else happens this year?
The big goal this year, Lobo, is exactly as you just said it, an updated from the 2020 PEA that will incorporate ore sorting, put in updated economics. We're going to use the current or more robust metal prices that reflect more of the current market for molybdenum and copper and silver. And we're also obviously going to have to increase the cost too, because between 2020 and 2023, everything's going up in price, particularly
just a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. It's particularly fuels and consumables, which are up like 80%. So yeah, you got to take that into account. But with the effect of ore sorting and with the effect of the price, and despite the cost increases, like I said earlier, we're looking for a really strong economic result, irrespective of what discount rate we end up using and publishing. So that's the deliverable for this year, but it depends on the other items that I mentioned earlier, the scanning, and then the ore sorting, and then what I'm doing right now is rounding up the various potential publishers, the lead authors of the updated PEA, and deciding which ones fit the best, which ones can, with the help of other QPs, can come in and give us the best result. And the goal is to publish that before the end of 2023.
Okay, and then assuming it's great, you can raise a bunch of money to drill the thing off, head for measured and indicated, and ultimately proven improbable. Is there an exploration side to this, or is it just it's already so big that all we need to do is prove it up?
No, we're going to explore. 2024 will be exploration. By the way, I haven't given you actual numbers, but on the copper equivalent side, given the numbers that I gave you earlier, the prices I gave you earlier, we've got over 12 billion pounds of copper equivalent, and that actually reduces itself to pretty close to 4 billion pounds of copper, about 1.5 billion pounds of moly, and 200 million ounces of silver. And that's all measured and indicated. And that's been attested to by various QPs. We have about the same in inferred. And so your question is very apt, because the next stage would be to do some infill drilling and bring the inferred into at least the M&I category. Beyond that, we have other drilling to do. There is good expansion potential to the west. We think we're getting into some higher copper zones. By the way, this is a zoned deposit. There's a copper silver zone on top, followed by a combination copper molybdenum zone, and then you get into the core, which is molybdenum. And ultimately, we'll come up with the right mine plan, the way to actually design the pit, and that'll be part of the work that's going to be done, at least for this updated PEA.
All right. Well, you've been working on this, and your predecessors for that much time, you have that much data. Why are we looking at an updated PEA now instead of going to a PFS?
We need the updated PEA because the optimal ore sorting hasn't been established, and we'd rather do it this way. I think at the end of this year, with a positive result, which again, we're all expecting, we'll do exactly what you're indicating. We're going to go right to a PFS, and that PFS will probably be Originally it was going to be a year and a half, but I think a lot of the work that we're doing for this updated PEA will feed into the PFS. And you're right, on the bigger exchange, we'll raise the capital necessary to do that. Originally, we thought it was going to be about $30 million. It'll probably be less than that now, since some of the money's being spent on the updated PEA. So call it once we say go on the PFS, it'll probably be a year and maybe $20 to $25 million. And a lot of that's obviously for the drilling and road improvement and other things that we need to do in the area.
Right. Well, then your presentation needs to be updated. I noticed that it said something like 2 years from after the PEA to get to the PFS, and I was wondering about that. It seemed like a long time. But okay, so this year it's all about the PEA and the uplisting. How much does that cost, and how much do you have in the bank?
We are, let me answer those inversely. We are in the middle of a raise currently. We are focusing on raising approximately, call it about $2 million. I would say we're pretty close to halfway there, or we're getting there. In the bank, we've got, well, I'm talking about commitments. In the bank, we've got, I'm going to guess about 600, but the PEA update this year by itself, we budgeted 750. And we think we can bring it in later, lesser than that. That includes some of the scanning work. That assumes that we'd be scanning 100% of the core, and I don't think we're going to have to do that. I think we're probably going to end up scanning only a portion of the core to get to the result that we need. And scanning is expensive, by the way.
All right. So you're raising the money now, but you didn't, cash in the bank. Where are we at right now?
Well, if I had the CFO on the line, I'd be able to tell you exactly, but I'm going to guess because I know that we closed on some money recently. I think we've got about, like I said, 500 to 600 in the bank today. All
right. Okay. Well, it's in a sense, it's a fairly simple story. We'll see what kind of IRR. Hopefully, this time we'll see an IRR number, out of the PEA, and then that will enable you to go forward or not. I always wrap up with the skin in the game question, but we've kind of talked about 10 different things here. So, and you've been a pretty good sport with some tough questions. So I'll give you a chance. Is there anything else you want to make sure the investing audience out there knows about your company and your project before we wrap up?
Lobo, I don't think so. I think we've covered pretty much the highlights of what this project's about. It's a very massive project. It's domestic. It's in the U.S. I guess maybe one thing we haven't talked about is the ability to access some of the funding that the government is providing. We are looking at not only the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, which has incentives, but we're also looking at the potential to use electric vehicles, potentially hydrogen vehicles, potentially, this is obviously in the study stage, but using some ability from the topography to generate some of our own electricity. So there's a lot of things that are going on right now. So the DOE, Department of Energy, has special programs where they can help you fund some of your capital projects and also give you very low cost loans to help this project come in. So if we end up less than $1 billion, which I hope we will after this second iteration of the updated.
I have actually seen that before. If your deposit's on a hillside and your plant's down below, the gravity on the conveyor can actually generate electricity. Is that your situation, or where would you generate from?
We're a little bit inverted from that. The pit's going to be below, at least the conveyors will be in the pit below, but so it'll be power up, but then down to the plant. And the biggest savings will be after the plant, after the concentrator. We believe that we can convey in sort of a the term is evading me right now. Downhill, like the ski slopes use, but using buckets. It's like a 20-mile straight downhill to a rail loadout. We need the rights of way, of course. It's going to go over basically Forest Service land, have high towers to do that. But that sort of a system will generate a lot of power for us.
That reminds me of another story. This was I think it was in Kosovo, or maybe it was still Serbia at the time. This was some years ago, and I'm scratching my head. But I remember going around with the geologist and looking at these various copper projects, in fact. And there was this big swath across the countryside. it looked like where power lines, in the US where you have power lines clear off the forest and you see this stripe of lighter green where the power lines go through. It looked like that. And I said, what's that? And he said the Soviets, or back in the Tito era, the Soviets had helped the Yugoslavs put in an aerial tram with buckets like that full of ore. And it was full of nasties. It had arsenic and who knows what else in it. And so basically this 15-kilometer tram line had a kill zone underneath, which now decades later was still not good. I'm not helping you here. So maybe I should ask, do you have any nasties in your ore? Is there anything like that might fall out of the bucket?
No. And the initial tests that we looked at, the ore is not ARD generating. So that's going to be helpful. Now, we've got to do some more metallurgy, but I think that when push comes to shove, this is not going to be something that's going to be an environmental concern, not like a lot of other mines. Always environmental concerns, but nothing serious from what I know today.
All right. Well, very interesting. So I got to ask the skin in the game question. If you want me to put my own hard-earned money into your company, how much of your own cash, not free shares, how much of your money have you put into this?
I've deferred a lot of salary to go into this, over $100,000, if that gives you an idea. And the company is paying some of us part of our salary, but not everything. So over the last 2 years or year and a half I've been involved with this, it's probably on the order of $150,000.
Well, sweat equity is not nothing, so we'll give you a little credit for that. All right. Well, thank you very much. You've been a good sport, and please keep us posted on your progress.
Again, can't thank you enough for the ability to come on and talk about the project. Really appreciate it, and hope that your listeners come away with a reasonably positive view of what we're doing.
Thank you for watching this edition of In the Pit with Lobo Tigre. If you enjoyed or found value in what you just saw, and you're watching this on any sort of social media, please do hit the like button and the share link. Send this on to anybody you think might be interested. That helps us out a lot. If you're watching this on YouTube, please do hit the subscribe button as well. The number of subscribers helps us get more valuable content to you as well. On the subject of subscribing, I'll quickly say that if you're not a subscriber to our free weekly Speculators Digest, I encourage you to sign up. I promise if you do, we will not send you a flood of daily advertisements. You get one free weekly digest with original research not published anywhere else. Check it out at independentspeculator.com. Thank you and have a great day.